Dr. Eleanor Webb had been working as a photography conservator at the Boston Historical Society for nearly a decade, but nothing had prepared her for what she would discover on that rainy Tuesday in November. The Society had recently acquired a collection of Civil War-era daguerreotypes from the estate of a wealthy Beacon Hill family, and Eleanor had been tasked with cataloguing and preserving the delicate images. "Most of these will need to be rehoused," she told her assistant Marcus, as they carefully examined the first box. "The cases are showing significant deterioration." Marcus nodded, making notes on his tablet. At 26, he was fresh out of his conservation program and eager to learn from Eleanor's experience. "What's that one?" he asked, pointing to a small, ornate case, partially hidden beneath several loose photographs. Eleanor gently extracted the case. It was more elaborate than the others, made of finely tooled leather with silver corner protectors that had tarnished to near black. A small brass plate on the front bore the inscription, "Elizabeth and Emily Blackwood, 1861. "Twins, perhaps," Eleanor murmured, carefully opening the case. Inside was a daguerreotype of two young women, perhaps 16 or 17, seated side by side in identical high-necked black dresses. Their faces were solemn, as was typical for photographs of the era given the long exposure times, but there was something unsettling about their expressions. Their eyes seemed to hold a peculiar intensity, staring directly into the camera with an almost challenging gaze. "They look identical," Marcus observed, leaning closer. "Not quite," Eleanor said, reaching for her loupe. "Look at the one on the right. See that small scar above her eyebrow?" As Eleanor studied the image more carefully under magnification, she noticed something odd about the daguerreotype's surface. "This is strange. There appears to be some kind of secondary image emerging beneath the primary exposure." "Could it be plate deterioration?" Marcus suggested. "Possibly, but I've never seen deterioration quite like this." Eleanor frowned. "Let's get it under the imaging lights." In the conservation lab, Eleanor placed the daguerreotype under the specialized LED examination lights used to detect alterations and damage in historical photographs. What happened next would change everything. As the blue spectrum light passed over the image, both Eleanor and Marcus gasped. The faces of the twins seemed to transform. Where moments before had been the solemn but ordinary faces of two Victorian young women, the light now revealed horrifically distorted features. Their eyes appeared sunken and hollow, their skin mottled with what looked like severe decomposition, and their mouths stretched in silent screams. "What the hell?" Marcus stumbled backward, nearly knocking over a tray of tools. Eleanor remained frozen, staring at the nightmarish transformation. It's like they're dead," she whispered, "but that's impossible. This can't be a double exposure or any photographic technique I'm familiar with from that period." As suddenly as it had appeared, the ghastly image faded when Eleanor adjusted the light. Under normal illumination, the twins appeared normal again, their solemn faces betraying nothing of the horror that lurked beneath. "We need to document this," Eleanor said, her voice steadier than she felt, "and we need to find out everything we can about Elizabeth and Emily Blackwood." Over the next few days, Eleanor and Marcus divided their time between carefully documenting the strange phenomenon in the daguerreotype and researching the Blackwood family. The estate that had donated the collection had provided minimal provenance information, but Eleanor was able to trace the family through census records and newspapers from the period. The Blackwoods had been a prominent Boston family in the mid-19th century. Harrison Blackwood, a successful shipping merchant, and his wife Margaret had 5 children, including twin daughters Elizabeth and Emily. According to the 1860 census, the twins would have been 16 at the time the daguerreotype was taken. "I found something," Marcus said late Friday afternoon, looking up from his computer. "It's an obituary from the Boston Evening Transcript, dated June 1861. Eleanor moved to read over his shoulder, feeling a chill as she absorbed the words on the screen. Blackwood. Suddenly, at their residence on Mount Vernon Street, Elizabeth and Emily, beloved daughters of Harrison and Margaret Blackwood, aged 17 years. Funeral services private. June 1861, Eleanor murmured. That's the same year as the photograph. They died shortly after it was taken, but it doesn't say how they died, Marcus pointed out. Suddenly could mean anything, accident, illness. We need to find out more, Eleanor said firmly. This photograph, there's something very wrong about it. That night, Eleanor couldn't sleep. The images of the twins' transformed faces kept flashing in her mind. Around 3 in the morning, she got up and opened her laptop, deciding to continue her research. She accessed the Historical Society's digital archives and searched for any additional mentions of the Blackwood twins. After an hour of searching, she found a brief article from a smaller local paper, dated just a week before the twins' obituary. Tragedy on Beacon Hill. The twin daughters of merchant Harrison Blackwood were discovered deceased in their bedchamber yesterday morning by their lady's maid. The circumstances of their passing are unusual, and authorities have been summoned to investigate. The family has requested privacy during this difficult time. Eleanor sat back, her mind racing. Unusual circumstances suggested something beyond illness, perhaps an accident or even foul play. But what could it have to do with the strange phenomenon in the photograph? She was about to close her laptop when a new email notification appeared. It was from Dr. Richard Havers, a photography historian she had contacted earlier about the daguerreotype. Dear Eleanor, the email began, your discovery is fascinating and disturbing. While I've never encountered this exact phenomenon, there were some post-mortem photography practices in the 1860s that experimented with double exposures to create spirit photographs. However, these were typically fraudulent attempts to show the ghost of a deceased person alongside living relatives. What you're describing sounds different and far more troubling. I've attached some articles on unusual daguerreotype techniques from that era that might help. Also, you mentioned the Blackwood family. There was a scandal involving that family that I vaguely recall from my research on Boston history. You might want to check the private journals of Edwin Palmer, a physician who documented unusual cases. Some of his papers are in your society's collection, I believe. Eleanor quickly searched the Society's catalogue and found that they did indeed have 3 volumes of Edwin Palmer's journals, donated in the 1920s, but never fully catalogued or digitized. They were stored in the rare manuscripts section. First thing Monday morning, Eleanor headed straight for the rare manuscripts room. The Palmer journals were thin, leather-bound volumes, the pages filled with a cramped, difficult handwriting. Eleanor settled in to read, starting with the volume covering 1861. It was nearly noon when she found what she was looking for, an entry dated June 3rd, 1861. Called to the Blackwood residence on Mount Vernon Saint this morning on a most disturbing matter. The twin daughters, E and E, found deceased in their bedchamber. No obvious cause, no signs of violence or illness. The young ladies were discovered sitting upright in chairs facing one another, their expressions fixed in what the maid described as terror. The family photographer had visited yesterday to take their portrait, a birthday gift from their parents. Mr. B is insistent that no autopsy be performed and that the matter be kept quiet. He mentioned the girls had been experimenting with matters they ought not to have been, and that God has passed judgment. I'm troubled by this case, but must respect the family's wishes. The bodies were removed for immediate burial. Eleanor read the passage 3 times, her skin prickling with gooseflesh. The twins had died the very day after their photograph was taken, found sitting in poses eerily similar to how they appeared in the daguerreotype. She continued reading, finding one more brief mention a week later. Heard from Mrs. Blackwood's lady companion that the girls had become fascinated with spiritualism and had been conducting séances in secret. They had acquired a book of rituals from a sailor returned from the Orient on one of their father's ships. Mrs. B discovered this book after their passing and had it burned immediately. The family is leaving Boston for their summer home in Newport earlier than usual this year. I suspect they are fleeing gossip. Eleanor closed the journal, her mind whirling with this new information. Spiritualism had been popular in the mid-19th century, but it was generally considered a parlor entertainment for the upper classes, not something that would result in death. What kind of ritual could the girls have been performing, and how could it possibly connect to the disturbing transformation in their photograph? When she returned to the conservation lab, she found Marcus already there, looking troubled. "I've been doing more tests on the daguerreotype," he said without preamble. "Eleanor, I don't think this is deterioration or a photographic trick. I think something was captured on that plate that wasn't supposed to be." "What do you mean?" "I've been experimenting with different light wavelengths. The effect is strongest under ultraviolet, completely invisible under normal light, and partially visible under our blue conservation LEDs. It's almost as if the plate captured 2 moments in time." 2 moments? Eleanor echoed, thinking of what she'd read in Palmer's journal. Like before and after death? Marcus looked startled. "That's a disturbing thought, but yes, something like that. What did you find out about the twins?" Eleanor told him about Palmer's journal entries and the twins' apparent interest in spiritualism. "They died the day after this photograph was taken, Marcus. Found sitting just as they are in the image." "Jesus," Marcus whispered. "So you think whatever ritual they were performing, it somehow affected the photographic process?" "I don't know," Eleanor admitted. "It sounds impossible, but I can't think of any scientific explanation for what we're seeing." They both fell silent, looking at the innocent-seeming daguerreotype case on the workbench. "There's something else," Marcus finally said. "I noticed it when I was examining the case more closely." He picked up the daguerreotype and carefully removed the plate from its housing. "Look at the back." Eleanor leaned in. Scratched into the copper back of the plate were tiny symbols, circles intersected with lines, strange angular characters that resembled no alphabet Eleanor recognized. "These weren't made by the photographer," Marcus said quietly. "They're too crude, and they'd have no place in the production process." "The twins," Eleanor murmured. "They must have altered the plate somehow, before or after the photograph was taken. Part of whatever ritual they were performing." "But what were they trying to do?" Marcus asked. Eleanor had no answer, but a sense of dread was building within her. "I think we need to be very careful with this artifact," she said at last. "Very careful indeed." A week passed, during which Eleanor became increasingly obsessed with the Blackwood twins and their mysterious photograph. She had taken to working late, long after Marcus and the other staff had gone home. Tonight, she sat alone in the conservation lab, the daguerreotype under a glass cover on her workbench, like a specimen too dangerous to touch. The Society's director, Dr. Harriet Chen, had become concerned about Eleanor's fixation. That afternoon, she had stopped by the lab with a gentle suggestion that perhaps the Blackwood daguerreotype should be set aside for now, with so many other items in the collection needing attention. "There's something important here, Harriet," Eleanor had insisted, "something historically significant." "I understand your interest," Dr. Chen had replied carefully, "but your behavior is becoming concerning. Marcus tells me you've been here until midnight every night this week." Eleanor had promised to scale back, to maintain better balance. But here she was at 10 p.m., still hunched over her computer, following yet another thread in her research. She had managed to track down living descendants of the Blackwood family. Harrison and Margaret had had 3 other children besides the twins, 2 sons and another daughter. The family line had continued through the oldest son, James. His great-granddaughter, Catherine Blackwood Sanders, now in her 70s, still lived in Massachusetts, in a small town on the North Shore. Eleanor had found her phone number and had been staring at it for 20 minutes, trying to decide whether to call. It was too late now, of course. It would have to wait until morning. She turned back to the daguerreotype, which she had been systematically photographing under different light conditions. The transformation was most dramatic under ultraviolet light, but she had discovered that even subtle changes in the angle and intensity of ordinary light could cause slight shifts in the image, hints of the horror beneath. "What happened to you?" she whispered to the solemn faces of Elizabeth and Emily Blackwood. "What were you trying to do?" Eleanor jumped at a sudden sound. The security guard, Jeff, knocking on the glass door of the lab. She waved him in. "Working late again, Dr. Webb?" he asked, looking concerned. "Just finishing up," she assured him, though they both knew it was a lie. "Found something interesting in those old photos?" Eleanor hesitated. Jeff was a retired police detective who worked security at the Historical Society 3 nights a week. He was intelligent and observant, and Eleanor had always found him easy to talk to. "Actually, yes," she said slowly. "Something very strange." Before she could reconsider, she found herself telling him about the daguerreotype and the twins' mysterious deaths. Jeff listened attentively, his expression growing more serious. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment before saying, "Mind if I take a look?" Eleanor carefully placed the daguerreotype under the examination light and adjusted it to show the transformation. Jeff didn't flinch or gasp as Marcus had done, but his face hardened. "In my years on the force, I saw a lot of death," he said quietly. "Those are death faces, Dr. Webb, not artistic, not symbolic, the actual faces of the dead." A chill ran down Eleanor's spine. "But how is that possible? Photography in 1861 couldn't capture this kind of detail, this kind of change." "I don't know," Jeff admitted. "But I've seen enough crime scene photos to recognize what I'm looking at. These girls were dead when this secondary image was captured, and it wasn't peaceful." Eleanor told him about Dr. Palmer's journal entries and the suggestion that the twins had been involved in some kind of ritual. "Sounds like they got more than they bargained for," Jeff said grimly. "Look, Doctor Webb, Eleanor, I don't want to overstep, but be careful with this thing. In my experience, when you can't explain something, it's best to leave it alone." After Jeff left, Eleanor sat staring at the daguerreotype for a long time. She should put it away and go home. She should listen to Jeff and Dr. Chen and step back from this obsession. Instead, she picked up her phone and sent a text to Marcus. "I need your help with something. Can you meet me at the lab early tomorrow, 7 a.m.? His reply came almost immediately. "Sure. Everything okay? Just want to try something before everyone else arrives. I'll explain tomorrow." Eleanor arrived at the Historical Society at 6:45 the next morning, having barely slept. She'd spent most of the night researching mid-19th century spiritualism, particularly practices that incorporated photography. The spirit photography movement had begun around the time of the Civil War, with photographers claiming to capture images of ghosts, usually the faint translucent figures of deceased loved ones hovering near living subjects. Most had been debunked as double exposures or other darkroom tricks, but some remained unexplained. Marcus arrived at 7:05, looking tired but curious. "What's this about?" he asked as Eleanor let him in. "I want to try recreating the conditions of the original photograph," she explained, leading him to the lab where she had already set up her equipment. "The twins were experimenting with spiritualism, right? What if they were trying to capture something on the photographic plate? Like a spirit?" Marcus looked skeptical. "Or something else? Look at these." Eleanor showed him the printouts she had made of the symbols scratched on the back of the daguerreotype plate. "I've been researching these. They don't match any known spiritualist symbols from the period, but I found something similar in an obscure text about ancient Mesopotamian rituals. They believed certain symbols could open doorways between worlds." "Eleanor," Marcus began, his expression concerned. "I know how it sounds," she interrupted. "I'm not suggesting anything supernatural. I'm just trying to understand what the twins believed they were doing." She showed him the setup she had created. 2 chairs positioned exactly as the twins had been seated, a reproduction antique camera modified to approximate the chemical and exposure process of a period daguerreotype, and a series of lights that could be adjusted to different wavelengths. I want to take a series of photographs, varying the conditions slightly each time. Maybe we can figure out what caused the anomaly in the original. Marcus still looked dubious, but he helped her set up. They spent the next hour taking photographs, Eleanor carefully documenting each variation. They tried different exposure times, different light conditions, different angles. "We should include the symbols," Eleanor said, as they prepared for another attempt. "They might be crucial to whatever process the twins were attempting." "You want to scratch them into our photographic plates?" Marcus asked incredulously. "No, of course not. But we can project them." Eleanor had prepared a slide with the symbols, which she now positioned to project faintly onto the scene they were photographing. As they worked, Eleanor told Marcus about her plan to contact Catherine Blackwood Sanders, the twins' great-niece. "Do you think she'll know anything about this?" Marcus asked. "It was over 160 years ago. Family stories get passed down," Eleanor said. "Especially the dark ones, even if they're only whispered about. And the Blackwoods were meticulous record keepers. She might have diaries, letters, something that could shed light on what happened." By 9 a.m., they had taken dozens of photographs and were starting to process them. Other staff members were arriving, giving curious glances at their unusual setup. Eleanor knew questions would follow, and she wasn't sure how to explain what they were doing without sounding obsessed or worse. Dr. Chen appeared at the lab door, her expression a mixture of concern and irritation. "Eleanor, Marcus, what's going on here?" Eleanor explained that they were conducting experiments to better understand the photographic techniques used in the Blackwood daguerreotype, deliberately keeping her explanation technical and academic. Dr. Chen didn't look entirely convinced, but she nodded slowly. "Just remember that we have the Gardner collection opening in 3 weeks. That needs to be your priority." "Of course," Eleanor assured her. "This is just side research." After Dr. Chen left, Marcus gave Eleanor a pointed look. "She's worried about you. So am I, to be honest." "I'm fine," Eleanor insisted. "I just need to understand this. Why? Why is this so important to you?" Eleanor hesitated, not entirely sure herself. "Because something happened to those girls, something terrible, and everyone just covered it up. They were written out of history, their deaths unexplained. They deserve better than that." Marcus nodded slowly. "Okay, but promise me you'll take a step back if this keeps escalating. This photograph, it's affecting you." "I promise," Eleanor said, though even as she spoke the words, she knew she was already too deep to step back. That afternoon, Eleanor called Catherine Blackwood Sanders. The older woman answered on the 3rd ring, her voice surprisingly strong and clear. "Mrs. Sanders, my name is Dr. Eleanor Webb. I'm a conservator at the Boston Historical Society. We recently acquired some items from your family's estate, and I was hoping I might speak with you about them." "Oh." There was a pause before Catherine replied. "What items exactly, Dr. Webb?" "Photographs mainly, including a daguerreotype of Elizabeth and Emily Blackwood from 1861. The silence that followed was so long that Eleanor thought they might have been disconnected. Finally, Catherine spoke, her voice noticeably tighter. "I see. And what is it you want to know about my great-aunts?" Eleanor chose her words carefully. "The daguerreotype has some unusual characteristics that I'm trying to understand from a conservation perspective. I also found some historical records suggesting they died very shortly after the photograph was taken. I'm trying to establish provenance and historical context for our records." Another long pause. "I don't discuss Elizabeth and Emily with strangers, Dr. Webb. That part of our family history is complicated." "I understand," Eleanor said quickly. "But this photograph is quite remarkable, and any information you could provide would be invaluable to our archives." "Remarkable," Catherine repeated flatly. "Is that what you call it? What exactly have you seen in this photograph, Dr. Webb? Eleanor hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. There appears to be a secondary image visible under certain light conditions. The twins appear different. Dead, Catherine said bluntly. They appear dead, don't they? Eleanor's breath caught. Yes. How did you know? Because it's not the only such photograph. There were others, though most were destroyed by the family. Catherine's voice had taken on a resigned quality. I suppose you'd better come see me, Dr. Webb. This isn't a conversation to have over the phone. They arranged for Eleanor to visit Catherine's home the following Saturday. As she hung up, Eleanor felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension. She was finally going to get answers, but she wasn't sure she was ready for them. The rest of the week passed in a blur of regular work duties and continued research on the daguerreotype. The photographs she and Marcus had taken showed nothing unusual, no matter how they manipulated the conditions. Whatever had happened with the original couldn't be replicated with their methods. Saturday morning arrived crisp and clear. Eleanor drove north to the small coastal town where Catherine Blackwood Sanders lived, her mind racing with questions. The address led her to a modest colonial-style house set back from the road, surrounded by old oak trees. Despite its unassuming appearance, Eleanor noted the careful maintenance and quality of the property, subtle signs of old money. Catherine answered the door herself, a tall, straight-backed woman with silver hair cut in a neat bob. Her eyes, sharp and assessing, took in Eleanor's appearance with a single glance. "Dr. Webb," she said, extending her hand. "Please come in." The interior of the house was like Catherine herself, elegant, traditional, and revealing little. She led Eleanor to a sitting room overlooking a well-tended garden and gestured to an armchair. "Tea?" Catherine offered, and at Eleanor's nod she left briefly, returning with a tray holding a teapot and 2 cups. After pouring, she settled herself in the chair opposite Eleanor. "So," she said without preamble, "you've seen what happens to Elizabeth and Emily's faces in the right light. Tell me, has anything else occurred since you started working with the photograph?" Eleanor frowned. "What do you mean? Strange occurrences? Unexplained phenomena? Dreams, perhaps?" "I've had trouble sleeping," Eleanor admitted, "and I've become, perhaps, overly focused on the photograph, but nothing I would call unexplained." Catherine studied her for a moment. "That's good. It means it's contained for now." She sighed. "The Blackwood twins have been our family's burden, shall we say, for generations. Their story is not one we share publicly." "I found Dr. Palmer's journal entries," Eleanor said. "He mentioned they were involved in spiritualism, that they had a book of rituals." Catherine nodded. "Yes, but it went beyond typical Victorian parlour spiritualism. The book came from Singapore, brought back by a captain of one of my great-grandfather's ships. It contained rituals far older and more dangerous than the fashionable séances of Boston society." "What were they trying to do?" Eleanor asked, leaning forward. "Create a window between worlds," Catherine said simply. The book described a ritual that could supposedly allow one to see into the realm of the dead. It required specific conditions, twin practitioners, a new moon, and a method of capturing the moment when the window opened. Photography was still relatively new then, but the twins saw its potential for their purpose. And the symbols on the back of the plate? Part of the ritual. They were meant to be inscribed on the surface that would capture the image. Catherine sipped her tea. The twins prepared everything meticulously. They bribed the family photographer to let them prepare the plate themselves, telling him they wanted to surprise their parents with an artistic effect. On the night of the new moon, they performed the ritual and had their photograph taken the next day. "But they died immediately after," Eleanor said. "Yes. The family found them in their bedroom, seated exactly as they are in the photograph, facing each other. Their faces—" Catherine paused. "Their faces were frozen in expressions of absolute terror, their eyes fixed on something no one else could see." "What happened to them?" Eleanor whispered. "The official cause was heart failure. But my grandfather, their youngest brother who was only 10 at the time, told a different story. He had sneaked into their room while they were conducting the ritual and watched from behind a curtain. He said that when they spoke the final words, something appeared between them, something that wasn't human. What was it? Eleanor asked, her mouth dry. Catherine shook her head. He would never say exactly, only that it spoke to them, told them it would return for them, and that in exchange for opening the window, they would have to cross through it. And the photograph. The photographer delivered it the day after they died. When the family saw what it contained, the transformation that occurred in certain light, they were horrified. My great-grandfather wanted it destroyed, but his wife believed that destroying it might free whatever had been captured, so they kept it locked away, a secret shame passed down through generations. Until it was donated to the Historical Society, Eleanor said. Yes, my cousin handled the donation. He's the last of the direct male line, and he never believed the family stories. Thought it was all superstition. Catherine's mouth tightened. He should have known better. Mrs. Sanders, Eleanor said carefully, while this is fascinating from a historical perspective, you're speaking as if you believe something supernatural occurred. Wouldn't you if you'd seen what I've seen? Catherine asked sharply. My father showed me the photograph when I was 18, as his father had shown him. He warned me about it, told me never to display it in certain light. I didn't believe him either, thought it was just an old family ghost story. She paused, her eyes distant with memory. Until the dreams started. Dreams? Of Elizabeth and Emily, of what they saw, what spoke to them. What's still waiting on the other side of that window they opened? Catherine focused on Eleanor again. Has anyone else seen the photograph under the revealing light? Just my assistant Marcus and Jeff, one of our security guards. Watch them, Catherine advised. The effect builds slowly. Dreams first, then waking visions. An obsession with the photograph, with the twins. A compulsion to recreate the conditions, to open the window wider. Eleanor felt a chill. Wasn't that exactly what she had been doing? What happened to the book, she asked. The one with the rituals. Burned, according to family legend, but not before the twins copied the key elements of the ritual. Those papers were supposedly buried with them. Catherine set down her teacup. Dr. Webb, I've told you this story because you have a right to know what you're dealing with. Now I'm asking you, put that photograph away. Seal it in a light-proof container and lock it in your deepest archive. Don't study it, don't display it, and for God's sake, don't try to replicate what the twins did. You really believe it's dangerous? Eleanor said, not quite a question. I believe that some doors, once opened, are very difficult to close again, Catherine replied. And I believe that Elizabeth and Emily Blackwood paid a terrible price for their curiosity. Don't make their mistake. Eleanor drove back to Boston in a state of agitation, her mind reeling from Catherine's story. Part of her, the rational, scientifically trained part, wanted to dismiss it as family mythology built around a tragic but mundane death. Heart failure, perhaps, or an undiagnosed condition that had affected both twins simultaneously. But another part of her couldn't shake the image of those transformed faces, the terror frozen in their expressions. And if she was honest with herself, she had been experiencing exactly what Catherine described, the dreams, the obsession, the compulsion to understand, to recreate. When she arrived home, she found herself too restless to stay in her apartment. She decided to go to the Historical Society, telling herself she needed to check on some tests they had running, though she knew the real reason was to see the daguerreotype again. The building was quiet on a Saturday evening, with only minimal security staff present. Jeff wasn't working tonight. Instead, it was a younger guard named Alicia who greeted Eleanor with surprise. Working weekends now, Dr. Webb? Just need to check on a few things, Eleanor said with a forced smile, trying to project normalcy. In the conservation lab, she found herself drawn immediately to the cabinet where the daguerreotype was stored. She had placed it in an acid-free box, carefully labeled, but had not followed Catherine's advice to seal it away. Not yet. As she reached for the box, her phone rang, startling her. It was Marcus. "Eleanor? Are you at the lab?" "Yes, just checking on some things. What's up?" "I've been having these dreams," Marcus said without preamble, his voice tense. "About those twins in the photograph. Every night this week, and today I found myself researching spiritualism for hours, looking at those symbols we found. I can't stop thinking about it." Eleanor closed her eyes briefly. Catherine had warned her about this. "I know. I've been experiencing the same thing. That's not normal, Eleanor. We need to talk about this. I'm coming in." "No, don't," she began, but he had already hung up. Eleanor stood motionless for a moment, then slowly opened the box containing the daguerreotype. The twins gazed solemnly up at her, their secret hidden behind normal light. Almost without conscious decision, she moved to the examination table and set up the specialized lights. She told herself she was just confirming what they already knew, documenting the phenomenon one more time before locking the photograph away, as Catherine had advised. As the ultraviolet light washed over the image, the transformation occurred. More dramatic than Eleanor remembered, the twins' faces decayed before her eyes, their flesh seeming to melt away, revealing the horror beneath. But this time, Eleanor noticed something she hadn't seen before. Between the twins, faintly visible, was a shape. It was indistinct, a blur, really, but it suggested a figure standing behind them, its hands resting on their shoulders. Eleanor stared, her heart pounding. Had that always been there? How had she missed it? She adjusted the light, trying to bring the shape into better focus. "I see you've found it," a voice said from the doorway. Eleanor jumped, nearly knocking over the light. Marcus stood there, his face pale and drawn, dark circles under his eyes suggesting he hadn't been sleeping any better than she had. "The third figure," he continued, moving into the room. "I saw it in my dream last night. It was standing between them, touching them, feeding on them somehow." "Marcus, I think we need to stop this," Eleanor said, Catherine's warnings echoing in her mind. "I spoke with a Blackwood descendant today. She believes the photograph is dangerous, that it somehow captured something that shouldn't have been disturbed." Marcus gave a humorless laugh. "A week ago, I would have said that was ridiculous. Now, I'm not so sure." He moved closer, staring at the transformed image. "But don't you want to know what it is? What really happened to them?" Before Eleanor could answer, the lights in the lab flickered. The ultraviolet lamp intensified for a moment, then dimmed. "What was that?" Eleanor whispered. "Power surge, maybe," Marcus suggested, but he didn't sound convinced. The ultraviolet lamp suddenly flared to an almost painful brightness, and both Eleanor and Marcus stepped back, shielding their eyes. When Eleanor looked back at the daguerreotype, she gasped. The image had changed again. The twins were no longer seated side by side. They appeared to be standing now, their decayed faces turned directly toward the viewers, their hands outstretched as if reaching through the photograph itself. And the blur between them had solidified into a more distinct shape. Still not clear enough to make out features, but unmistakably a figure, taller than the twins, its elongated arms encircling them. "That's not possible," Marcus breathed. "The image can't just change." As they watched in horror, a spiderweb of cracks appeared on the surface of the daguerreotype plate, spreading outward from the center, where the mysterious figure stood. "We need to turn off the light," Eleanor said urgently, reaching for the switch. But before she could reach it, the ultraviolet lamp exploded in a shower of sparks and glass. Eleanor and Marcus ducked instinctively. When they straightened, the lab was in darkness, except for the faint emergency lights near the door. "Are you okay?" Marcus asked, his voice shaking. "Yes, I think so," Eleanor replied, fumbling for her phone to use as a flashlight. As the beam swept across the examination table, she froze. "Marcus," the daguerreotype was gone. "It can't have fallen far," Marcus said, joining her in searching the floor around the table. But after several minutes, it was clear the photograph had vanished. "This isn't possible," Eleanor repeated, a cold dread building in her stomach. Things don't just disappear. At that moment, the lab door slammed shut with a force that made both of them jump. Marcus ran to it, trying the handle. "It's locked," he said, his voice rising with panic. "From the outside." "That's not possible either," Eleanor said. "Those doors don't lock automatically, and they certainly can't be locked from the outside without a key." They both froze as a new sound reached them, a soft rhythmic tapping like fingernails on glass. It seemed to be coming from the storage cabinets along the far wall. "Hello?" Eleanor called, her voice barely steady. "Is someone there?" The tapping stopped, replaced by a silence so absolute it seemed to press against their ears. Then, just as Eleanor was about to speak again, a voice whispered from the darkness, "Elizabeth? Emily?" It was a woman's voice, thin and brittle, like paper being torn. "Who's there?" Marcus demanded, moving closer to Eleanor. "They opened the window," the voice continued, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere. "They let us see them, and now we can see you." The temperature in the lab plummeted suddenly, their breath fogging in the air. Eleanor's phone flashlight flickered and died, plunging them into near-total darkness. "We need to get out of here," Marcus whispered urgently. "Now!" They moved toward the door, Eleanor reaching out to touch the wall for guidance. Her fingers encountered something cold and damp instead, something that felt horribly like wet flesh. She jerked her hand back with a cry. The emergency lights flickered, briefly illuminating the room. Eleanor's scream died in her throat. The walls of the lab were covered in what looked like daguerreotype plates, hundreds of them, each showing the same image. Elizabeth and Emily Blackwood, their faces decayed, their hands reaching outward. And between them, clearer now, was a tall, emaciated figure with elongated limbs and a face like a bleached skull. The lights went out again, and in the darkness, Eleanor felt something brush against her cheek, cold fingers, gentle but insistent. "Eleanor." Marcus's voice called from somewhere to her right, panic evident. "Where are you?" She tried to respond, but her voice wouldn't work. The cold fingers traced her jawline, then gripped her chin, forcing her face upward. She could see nothing, but she felt a presence looming over her, sensed a face drawing close to hers. "They wanted to see," the brittle voice whispered, so close now that cold breath tickled her ear. "They wanted to know what waits beyond. Shall I show you too?" The emergency lights flickered again, and Eleanor saw it, the figure from the photograph, standing directly in front of her, its skeletal face inches from hers. Its eye sockets were empty pits, yet she could feel it looking into her, through her. With a surge of terror-fueled strength, Eleanor shoved the figure away and lunged toward where she thought the door was, colliding with Marcus, who had the same idea. "The door's still locked," he gasped, pulling frantically at the handle. Eleanor pounded on the door, screaming for help. Surely Alicia would hear them, would come to investigate. The lights flickered once more, and Eleanor saw that the figure had moved again, now standing directly behind Marcus. Before she could warn him, skeletal hands closed around his throat, lifting him off his feet. "Marcus!" Eleanor screamed, trying to pull the creature's hands away. Her fingers passed through them as if they were smoke, yet they held Marcus with terrible strength. "The window is open," the creature whispered, its voice now a chorus of whispers, male and female, young and old. "Come with us. See what the twins saw." The walls seemed to ripple and dissolve, the hundreds of daguerreotype images melting together. Behind them, Eleanor could see not the solid wall of the lab, but a vast, dark landscape under a starless sky. Figures moved in that darkness, too many to count, all with the same hollow-eyed reaching posture as the twins in their transformed state. The creature released Marcus, who fell to the floor gasping for breath. It turned its attention back to Eleanor, reaching for her with long, bony fingers. "Don't fight," it said almost gently. Elizabeth and Emily fought. It only made the crossing more painful. Eleanor backed away until she hit the wall, which felt soft and yielding now, like a membrane about to tear. The darkness beyond seemed to pulse, reaching tendrils toward her. In that moment of absolute terror, Eleanor's mind cleared with sudden clarity. The twins had opened a window between worlds using the ritual and the daguerreotype. The photographic plate had somehow captured both their living image and their death image, along with whatever had come through to claim them. And now, through their obsession with the photograph, she and Marcus had widened that window. "Marcus," she gasped. "The symbols, the ones on the back of the plate. They're a doorway, but doorways can be closed." Marcus struggled to his feet, understanding dawning in his eyes. "We need to reverse them, negate them somehow." The creature moved closer, its form flickering between solidity and smoke. "Too late," it hissed. "The door is already open." Eleanor remembered Catherine's words. Some doors, once opened, are very difficult to close again. Not impossible, difficult. Her mind raced. In the stories she had researched, spirits and supernatural entities often had rules they had to follow, limitations to their power. This thing had needed the twins to invite it, to open the way. It had needed the photograph to maintain its connection to this world.